Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here presenting this research, our systematic review and meta-analysis findings, on behalf of my group of really wonderful colleagues, including Virginia Fauner, who's in the audience. So the question we asked was, is use of antiretroviral treatment associated with decreased condom use? And as a background to this, which many of you are probably familiar with already, we have rapidly expanding ART access in low and middle income countries. And ART in the literature has been hypothesized to be potentially associated with decreased condom use due to physical health improvements. As people feel better, they're more likely to have more sex, due to treatment optimism, which we've heard about already, and due to potentially assumptions or actual non-infectiousness with low or undetectable viral load. Conversely, ART may also be associated with increased condom use due to factors such as reduced depression, increased hope for the future, and importantly, regular medical contact, counseling, etc. Research from high-income countries has shown no association between ART use and unsafe sex. However, despite a rapidly expanding evidence base, there's been no published meta-analyses that have examined this issue in low and middle income countries. So our objective was to conduct a systematic review and meta-analysis of the association between ART use and condom use among people living with HIV in low and middle income countries. This was part of the Evidence Project, which is a National Institute of Mental Health funded project which examines the strength of the evidence for a variety of different HIV-related behavioral interventions in low and middle income countries. And we follow PRISMA reporting guidelines for all systematic reviews. So the inclusion criteria for this review were that the article had to be published in a peer-reviewed journal between January 1st, 1990 and May 9th, 2012, which was the date of our search. The study had to be conducted in a low or middle income country as defined by the World Bank. The study had to provide clinical care and ART to people living with HIV, and they had to present either pre-post or multi-arm data, and by multi-arm I mean an intervention group and a comparison group, and that somehow compared individuals who were on ART to those who were not on one of the following sexual risk behavior outcomes of interest. And these included condom use, as well as number of sexual partners, types of sexual partners, abstinence or sexual activity, sexual initiation, and STIs. And for the purpose of this analysis, I'm presenting only the condom use data, which was the only outcome for which we had sufficient number of studies to conduct a meta-analysis. So our search strategy, we did a comprehensive search strategy to identify articles that met these inclusion criteria. We searched 5 electronic databases using the search terms presented here. We also conducted hand searching of the table of contents of 4 journals, so we went through each table of contents over the course of that time period. And then once we identified studies that met our inclusion criteria, we went through and we screened the reference list of those included studies. And we continued this process iteratively until we'd exhausted and identified all the articles we could. We had, for data extraction and analysis, we had 2 graduate students who were trained as coders, independently abstract data from each article using standardized forms that we've developed for the project. And we conducted meta-analysis for outcomes when there were a sufficient number of studies that provided data in a format that we were able to meta-analyze. We used comprehensive meta-analysis software with random effects models. Wherever possible, we used adjusted odds ratios from the studies we included, and we stratified by gender and partner type where possible. So these are the results from our search. We found over 6,000 unique citations through all of the different search methods. Of these, ultimately 37 studies met our inclusion criteria, and of these, 15 studies were able to be included in a meta-analysis for the condom use outcomes. So these 37 studies, almost all were from sub-Saharan Africa, 30. The additional studies came from Thailand, Brazil, and India. Most of the studies used cross-sectional or prospective cohort designs. However, we did find 2 retrospective cohorts using chart reviews, and also 5 non-randomized control studies. And in those 5 studies, there were both ART and non-ART groups that were followed over time and compared. So here are the meta-analytic results for the first outcome, which was consistent condom use, as measured in studies. The left-hand column, you see the different analyses stratified by partner type, and in the final row, we have all partner types combined, which is a combination of all the above data. The The second column shows the gender of participants, whether it was both genders combined or whether it was stratified by male and female. The next column shows the number of studies included in that analysis. And the fourth column shows the odds ratio with a 95% confidence interval and p-value from the meta-analysis, and then tests of heterogeneity or differences across the studies within each analysis. And so what you'll see from this table is that if you look across all of the odds ratios are above 1, which indicates that people living with HIV reported more consistent condom use if they were on ART compared to people who were not on ART. And all of these were statistically significant in meta-analysis. This is a second meta-analysis for condom use, so this is the outcome condom use at last sex. And again, if you look at the column showing the odds ratios, all of the odds ratios are above 1, indicating that, again, people living with HIV who were on ART reported more condom use at last sex than those who were not on ART. And most of these were statistically significant, but a few were not, particularly the sub-analyses with smaller numbers of studies. So for those of you who don't like tables and prefer words, here's these results in words. In summary, people living with HIV on ART were more likely to report consistent condom use and condom use at last sex than those not on ART. And when combined across all partner types for consistent condom use and condom use at last sex, there was roughly a doubling of the odds. This finding was strikingly consistent across the sub-analyses we conducted by gender and by partner type, and the odds ratios ranged from 1.4 to 2.6, although not all of the sub-analyses were statistically significant. And the strongest effects were seen in consistent condom use with either HIV negative or unknown status partners, and also with spouses. And then in terms of the data analysis for heterogeneity across analyses was generally high. So some of the limitations from this work and next steps. The limitations, from a research perspective, there were generally weak study designs. There are obviously ethical limitations to doing a randomized control trial, so none of the 37 studies we included randomized people to treatment or not treatment, which is as it should be. However, of course, this reduces the ability for these studies to have controlled for all measured and unmeasured confounders. And so we did use adjusted odds ratios that controlled for confounding factors where available, but it's impossible for us to know whether that adjustment for confounding was appropriate or whether it was successful. And also these analyses only focus on people living with HIV, so we haven't examined the question of whether there is treatment optimism or associations among people who are HIV negative. However, the strengths are the large number of studies included in the review with consistent findings across the meta-analysis results. And we noticed a large number of additional studies coming out as we were conducting this review. So we're currently updating this review with a new search through June of 2014, and we have over 50 articles, which is great because we're going to be able to meta-analyze some of the additional outcomes that we weren't able to meta-analyze with the original search results. So in conclusion, our meta-analytic results show that in low and middle income countries, people living with HIV on ART are more likely to report condom use than those not on ART. And we feel this disputes some concerns about treatment optimism among people living with HIV in care. It's encouraging news for continued expansion of ART programs. And it also suggests that when we talk about treatment as prevention, it may be true in more ways than one, not just reducing infectivity through viral load, but potentially being associated with increased condom use. So I'd like to thank our funders, as well as all of the Johns Hopkins students who contributed to this work.